It appears as though some provision in this big beautiful bill will directly and very, very tangibly increase the electricity costs of basically every single state in the entire country. And this chart shows you a breakdown of exactly which states would experience the most. It appears like Wyoming would experience nearly a 30% increase in electricity costs. New Senate GOP bill would kill clean power and spike energy costs. Senate Republicans have crafted a tax and spending bill that would create an unprecedentedly hostile landscape for the development of solar and wind power. If passed in its current form, the Senate version of One Big Beautiful Bill released late Friday would crash the rollout of clean energy, which now accounts for over 90% of new electricity generation capacity being added to the U.S. power grid. It would also stymie the nascent U.S. solar, battery, and electric vehicle manufacturing sectors, which experts say are vital to putting the country on competitive footing with China. The bill would have a profoundly negative impact on the U.S. economy. It would spike energy costs for both households and companies, both of which are already dealing with rising utility bills nationwide. It would make it nearly impossible for utilities to keep up with fast rising energy demand from AI data centers. It would destroy jobs. If enacted, this stands to be the biggest job-killing bill in the history of this country, Sean McGarvey, president of the North America's Building Trades Union, wrote in a Saturday statement. The group estimated that the bill's cuts to energy incentives would eliminate an estimated 1.75 million construction jobs, translating to $148 billion in lost annual wages and benefits. In late May, the House passed its version of the bill, which was widely decried as disastrous for the clean energy industry. The Senate proposed a version earlier in June that was less aggressive in its phase-out of clean energy incentives, sparking hope that some Inflation Reduction Act provisions would be salvaged. But on Friday night, Senate Republicans reversed course and introduced a version of the bill that would be worse for clean energy, consumers, and the energy system as a whole than even the initial House bill. The House bill calls for abruptly ending clean energy tax credits within the next few years, which would leave hundreds of billions of dollars of investment in factories and clean energy products in financial limbo. What I don't get about all of this is I feel like this is sort of cutting off your nose to spite your face, right? Like if these Republicans want to pretend like they care about bringing jobs back to the U.S. and they care about manufacturing and they care about the average everyday person who's out there just trying to find a job and support his family or whatever, you think that they would be super against this sort of thing that would eliminate like millions of jobs. Literally over 1 million jobs would be eliminated as a result of this. I would think that even if they are full Kool-Aid drinking, they think climate change is a hoax and that it's all a cabal of Jews trying to control you and get you to buy their electric cars and whatnot, even if you're full in on that, I would think that the negative downsides of like completely just with a snap of the finger eliminating all current and future clean energy programs and the negative basically the negative job loss that would come with that, I would think that those same Kool-Aid drinkers would overlook like, oh yeah, I know we're making an electric car factory, I know we're building more solar farms or whatever, but like I'm going to overlook that because of just how much of a net positive this is economically to so many people. But they don't, that's the thing though, they don't care, they aren't acting in good faith. That's what maybe a good faith crazy person who believes that there's a cabal of Jews trying to control you with electric cars, they are beholden to fossil fuel, to legacy interests. They're beholden to fossil fuel companies. They're beholden to oil interests, to coal companies, to the current people that make money off of the way our current electric grid works and would stand to lose money from greening it or making it more sustainable. It just seems like cutting off your nose to spite your face. It just seems really short-sighted, and I think my problem is that I'm giving this analysis as if these are good faith actors, but they're not. They're bad faith actors. They're working backwards from their cynical perspective of how can we maximize profits for me and my buddies and whatnot. The Senate bill accelerates the elimination of these tax credits for clean energy, electric vehicles, and advanced manufacturing, Jesse Jenkins, head of Princeton's University Zero Lab, wrote in a Saturday Twitter post. Worse still, the Senate draft adds an unprecedented excise tax on solar and wind projects that aren't completed by 2027 based on their proportion of equipment made by companies with links to foreign entities of concern, including China, which produces most of the world's solar and battery technologies and materials. This is an extremely punishing thing that an unprecedented excise tax on solar and wind projects that aren't complete by 2027. These sorts of projects, right, like a large-scale wind farm or solar power project or whatever, these things take years and years and years to actually get finished, right? You have like the planning stage, you have the financing stage, you have the actual like surveying stage, you have the actual building stage, you have the city enforcement code people stage. You have so many different layers to this. These types of projects take years and years and years. 2027 is only 2 years away, right? I would imagine that any solar farm that you tried to get into works right now probably wouldn't even be done by 2027. I would imagine a whole bunch of these projects, there is no realistic way that they would be done by 2027. And also on top of the fact that the vast majority of these like renewable energy like equipment is made in China. That's just like the reality of the situation. And that's not going to change, right? We don't want that low-end manufacturing coming back to the US. We wouldn't be able to afford the products. It would cost us way too much to manufacture it here. So I don't understand. This seems beyond like punishing to do this sort of thing, right? This is beyond punishing. There's no like good faith justification for this sort of thing I can possibly come up with. You could maybe come up with good faith justifications for them cutting back, saying like, we aren't going to issue any new like loans or grants or whatever using this clean energy provision. We aren't going to do anything like that. And we maybe even be reviewing ones that are currently in the works. And if they're really early in the project planning stage and we haven't used all that much money already, maybe we'll consider just canceling them. But the idea that like you're going to punish a project that's already halfway through, or like maybe is 3/4 or 80% or 90% of the way done by the time this 2027 date rolls around, you're going to punish them based on that is like, there's no good faith argument for this I can possibly come up with. The only argument I can think of that would make any sense is if they think climate change is a hoax, they think it's all some cabal of Jews out to control you by getting you to buy their electric cars and use paper straws or whatever. That is the only reasoning I think that could make any sense whatsoever to doing this sort of thing. And obviously that reasoning is completely insane. Think tank Energy Innovation released an analysis on Sunday that forecast the bill, in large part due to this excise tax, would prevent the construction of 300 gigawatts of generation capacity by 2035. That's an enormous amount of foregone energy. The entire U.S. grid had an installed capacity of 1,200 gigawatts in 2023. Energy Innovation estimates the Senate bill would cost the U.S. $960 billion cumulative gross domestic product through 2034. So they were going to increase the size of the U.S. power grid by 25% by 2035, which based on all the reporting I've seen over the last few years, we're desperately in need of that. That the U.S. is projected to be, like the U.S. power grid is projected to not be able to handle the demands upcoming over the next decade or two, and that we very much need to expand. This will have a very tangible effect on energy costs all around the country. Anywhere that would have seen a new energy plant of some kind, whether it be renewable or not, built near them would have seen a reduction in their energy costs and their electricity bill. But as a result of this, because these projects are now going to be squashed, like right in the middle of creating them, this is going to have a tangible effect on this will increase people's electricity costs over the next however many years. This is one of those scenarios where you wish you could have a counterfactual to show people and show to them how bad this sort of thing is, because you almost need like mentally a counterfactual to understand how bad this is, right? You need to have on one hand where the U.S. continues along with this energy grid expansion and clean energy expansion or whatever, and then in 2035 we have that extra 300 gigawatts of energy capacity, and therefore electricity prices are lower as a result. Versus our current reality where we cancel all these clean energy projects, where we don't increase our electricity capacity in the United States, and where we see as an end result, a much higher electricity bill for the end consumer than in the counterfactual where we didn't do this silly decision to stop expanding our energy grid and building up clean energy and green energy and whatnot. Less generation capacity also means higher energy costs. Energy innovation, that's exactly what I'm saying. That's 100% of what I'm saying. It is a simple supply and demand equation, right? If we would have had a higher amount of demand, if we would have had a higher amount of supply, it will necessarily mean that the amount of money you have to pay to reach a certain amount of demand is lower. But we will have a lower amount of supply, which means that demand is You understand, it's a simple supply-demand equation. It's not complicated. Energy Innovation forecast that the bill would drive up wholesale electricity prices 19% by 2030 and 61% by 2035. That means households would spend hundreds of dollars per year more on utility bills by 2035. The hardest hit areas would be Republican-dominated states like Texas and Oklahoma, where fast-expanding solar and wind growth would be dramatically curtailed. And of course, the bill would derail any hope of the U.S. reining in its planet-warming carbon emissions. A May analysis from Princeton's Zero Lab found that policies promoted by the Trump administration and Republicans in Congress would increase the U.S.'s annual carbon emissions by an additional 1 billion metric tons by 2035, compared to leaving in place the policies created by the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act passed during the Biden administration. The legislation threats to U.S. energy affordability and reliability, industrial competitiveness, and economic growth are so stark that even President Trump's one-time ally, Elon Musk, has vigorously attacked it. In a Saturday Twitter post, he wrote that the Senate bill will destroy millions of jobs in America and cause immense strategic harm to our country. Utterly insane and destructive. It gives handouts to industries of the past while severely damaging industries of the future. While Elon is a short-sighted idiot a lot of the time, he's 100% right on this. He's 100% on the ball. This is really, really dumb. This is really, really dumb. This is the exact opposite sort of thing we should be doing. Industry experts warn that the excise tax that penalizes companies using materials from China, a spin on restrictions first introduced in the House legislation in May, is administratively unworkable. The rules are so Byzantine that it would be impossible for solar and wind developers to accurately assess what they would owe, potentially leading to the cancellation of projects unwilling to chance a bigger than expected excise tax bill. That's what I'm saying. This excise tax bill that they're talking about that I just read, it seems like extreme, like way over the line of anything good faith, and is clearly meant to disrupt the market in some really serious way. And I would imagine the only reason I can come up with for wanting to disrupt the market like that is cynical reasons to make a bag so you and all your homies can make as much money as possible for now and in the coming however many years. Analysis firm Rhodium Group previously projected that the House plans for repealing electricity tax credits would reduce new installations of clean capacity on the grid by 57% to 72% over the next decade. The new excise tax on wind and solar would add another 10 to 20% to the costs of those projects. The firm forecast over the weekend, leading to further financing challenges and likely resulting in even more canceled projects. The only thing that this could do is increased electricity prices, Ben King, director at Rhodium Group, told Canary Media on Monday. You're making everything that you want to build more expensive. Already, the legislation is undermining confidence among investors in energy infrastructure writ large, according to a Sunday research note from TD Cowen analysts John Miller and Cooper Pride. They called the Senate bill a full policy attack on renewables, highlighting the singling out of solar and wind for punitive tax reasons. I don't like using the word attack because it can be a bit sensational, but this is an outright attack on our current and future abilities to both expand our electricity grid and modernize it and make it more clean and green. Neil Bradley, chief policy officer of the Republican-friendly U.S. Chamber of Commerce, who wrote in a Saturday X post that taxing energy production is never good policy, whether oil, gas, or in this case, renewables. I'm pretty sure this is happening at the exact same time that we still give tens or hundreds of millions of dollars of direct subsidies to oil and gas companies. I think we provide subsidies to companies who do offshore drilling in, along various places along the U.S. coast. So why on earth would we be giving tax like subsidies to these oil companies at the exact same time we are making punitive, very, very harmful tax measures against wind and solar projects, over the next however many years. It's just like, it is so backwards. But it's not just backwards, right? Like, backwards would imply that like maybe they just don't believe in climate change and they're just old school and they think coal and oil is the way to go. But that is not the case. This is cynical. This is, we want to make a bag. We want our friends to make a bag. We want everybody around us and everybody who's in on this to make as much money as possible now and in the coming years, and that is all they care about. The Senate bill also makes things worse for wind and solar by requiring projects to be placed into service or actively providing electricity to the grid by the end of 2027 to receive expiring tax credits. That's a change from the existing commerce construction deadline that simply requires a project to have begun construction to earn the tax credits and could put tens of billions of dollars of projects now underway into financial turmoil. Harry Godfrey, head of federal affairs for trade organization Advanced Energy United, said that the placed in service requirements constitute a retroactive change to the law that strands investments, kills jobs, and undermines American energy abundance. The excise tax, meanwhile, represents a new tax on energy production coming at a time of rising prices. Joni Ernst and Chuck Grassley and Lisa Murkowski introduced an amendment on Monday seeking to remove those two provisions from the Senate bill. My understanding is that they were not successful in removing those provisions from the bill and that they voted for them anyways. And also a side note, I'm pretty sure Lisa Murkowski was literally tricked into signing the bill. She thought that there was some provision in there exempting Alaska from the Medicaid changes or whatever that they're doing. But then they actually didn't do that. And she signed it anyways without like reading if they had put that exemption in there. It is hilarious. Backers of the legislation have claimed that clean energy is inexpensive enough to compete with fossil fuels without federal incentives. Ending these federal giveaways will lead to a more market-driven allocation of capital, favoring energy sources that are more economically efficient and better suited to meeting growing demand. Thomas Pyle, president of the Institute for Energy Research, a right-wing think tank, told the Washington Post in a Sunday email. I think it's really, really good that they put a right-wing think tank here to like try and like undermine what he's saying here, because it's 100% stupid, right? The idea that like oil and gas, that coal power plants and more offshore oil drilling and use of fossil fuels is the way to meet our growing energy demand, and that is the future and whatnot, is just hilarious and completely devoid from reality. This dude is clearly working backwards from his conclusion of oil good, oil profits good, hurting oil profits bad. That means therefore renewables, which could hurt oil profits, are bad. That is his line of thinking. However, even fossil fuel proponent Alex Epstein, who has played a pivotal role in Senate energy policy developments, pushed back on the excise tax on wind and solar in a Saturday Twitter post. I strongly recommend fully desubsidizing solar and wind versus placing a kind of new tax on them, he wrote. That's what I don't get, is even this guy who's like a supposed fossil fuel proponent is saying that this is, I strongly recommend fully desubsidizing solar and wind versus placing a kind of new tax on them. Because he probably understands that, like, even though he likes fossil fuels, I don't know whatever his reasoning is, if it's good faith or not, but like, even though he likes fossil fuels, he understands that like renewables and whatnot do play a role in our overall electricity grid, and they do contribute, they add supply and therefore decrease the cost for people, and it is important that they are there in some capacity. He probably is just one of those people that doesn't think it should completely replace oil and gas and coal and whatnot, but that it still has some sort of role, which is the obvious, like, that is the furthest right opinion that would make any sense to me whatsoever. Any further than that, and you are off in the conspiracy theory land where you think climate change is a hoax, or you are a bad faith actor where you want to just maximize profits for you and your buddies at the expense of everything else. The push to increase reliance on fossil fuels to power the country's grid faces a serious hurdle. U.S. demand for electricity is growing far more quickly than fossil-fueled power plants can be built to serve it. Manufacturers of the turbines used in gas power plants are now backlogged through the early 2030s, with existing orders leaving no headroom to expand production to build new power plants to add to the country's resource mix. King noted that 85% of capacity in the pipeline right now is wind, solar, and batteries, and 86% of the capacity installed over the past 3 years is wind, solar, and batteries. You're taking the thing that can actually get built over the next few years as you're facing this generationally large surge in electricity demand and making it more expensive. The Electricity Reliability Council of Texas, which operates the state's grid, has forecast a need for 65 gigawatts of new generation and storage capacity by 2031. Where will the power come from? Where is this fairy tale place that makes 65 gigawatts of gas turbines for Texas? He told Canary Media on Monday. Their answer is, we'll get it eventually, but we'll have to stop the solar and wind and storage to get the gas. But throttling those clean energy resources in hopes that new gas-fired power plants can replace them would be very painful and expensive and downright impossible if you want AI in this country, Lewin said. You could do it, but you'd have soaring utility costs for consumers and AI competing with consumers for electricity. Something to keep in mind about all of this is like a lot of these large-scale AI data center projects or whatever get like subsidies and tax breaks and special incentives from the cities and locales that they are being built in. So I would imagine that as a result of all of this, that the increase in electricity prices is maybe going to be felt by these data centers and whatnot by some degree, but not to the full extent and not to the extent that they are going to be felt by the average everyday American and consumer, because a lot of these places get special sweetheart deals on their electricity, and that's not going to change. But they're not going to give you a sweetheart deal, Mr. who pays $200 a month on their electricity bill. They're not going to give you a sweetheart deal. They're just going to increase your electricity bill to $300. This is just so ass backwards and stupid, and will result in a very tangible, real increase in the cost of electricity over the next however many years, compared to what electricity costs would be in a few years had we not be doing this silly thing and allow clean energy and green energy production projects to continue to expand and grow and whatnot. Just dum 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 dum. This is so. This is dum 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 dum.